81. So excited for all of you to be here. For this wonderful webinar we have a lot of great speakers from the Philippines, as well as some youth speakers here who are doing some really good work. And so just some ground rules before we get started. So if y'all have any questions, please feel free to as the presentations from our speakers go through their presentation, feel free to put those on the chat. We'll have a few folks collecting and coalescing those questions. So at the Q&A session later, those will be sent to the speakers and they'll respond to those. Also note, some of the topics here, of course, we're celebrating Earth Day, and of course, we're here to celebrate the Earth, but also we're recognizing also that the Earth has been in dire straits. A lot of us have been involved in a lot of environmental justice work, and the work of environmental justice also does not take away from the people involved or the people that live on this planet. And so some of our speakers will be talking about some heavy topics and may have also, some in their presentations may have some graphic images as well, some of the realities that are going on in the Philippines. So if just wanted to let y'all know so that y'all can take care of yourselves. If you need to take a break, go to the bathroom, at your own house, or just not look at the screen for a little bit, we'll let y'all know about that as well. So yeah, so want to thank y'all for coming through, and we're gonna get started. First, so next slide. So yeah, welcome y'all. Next slide. I know a lot of folks here are, part of KA, but we also, this is a huge turnout, and we just want to also go through a brief history for even KA members might not know the brief history of the environmental justice work that KA has taken up throughout the years. So we're just going to keep this short. So next. So if folks didn't know, KA has been around before we were the Kabataan Network, and when Typhoon Haiyan hit the Philippines, or Typhoon Yolanda hit the Philippines, which was the biggest typhoon in human history, the youth of the U.S. Responded to what was going on and understood that that we needed to do something, and so going to support Typhoon Haiyan relief efforts with the grassroots community organizations that we worked with, not just our own, but worked with the larger community. We were able to raise 1 million in relief funds for the survivors of Typhoon Haiyan. But also beyond that, we also learned in our experience as KBKN that that 50 typhoons hit the Philippines regularly every year. So there's always going to be a need for disaster relief. And so throughout the years, we've responded through various typhoons, Typhoon Lando, Typhoon Mongkut, Typhoon Tisoy, and most recently the Taal eruption. And through the efforts of all of us, we were able to raise more funds for that. Next slide. About 8,000 or more. So, but beyond just giving relief, or go back. It's okay. Beyond just giving relief, we also wanted to see what was on the ground. And so what was on the ground in the Philippines, and what were the exact things that were happening to the people in regards to environmental degradation, and mining, and all of the different issues that are going on in the Philippines. So every year we sent people on participants through various mission trips, mission and now immersion trips into the Philippines, where we built and built coordination and built a community with the local communities that were there, poor peasants, as well as indigenous people, workers, as well as fisher folks. And we've been doing this every year to also continue our connection. So it's not just relief funds, but also we're creating genuine relationships with one another. And next, and of course, going on those mission trips isn't the end. We also understood that we all needed to take action, and not just do relief work, but to also support and the communities in the Philippines. We also decided to take action because the environmental issues going on were affecting the people, affecting poverty. There's also, issues of government corruption. And so all of us through KBKN and now Kabataan Alliance, taking stances to, also defend and fight and support um, indigenous people's struggles for land, against mining, supporting their education, and also coming together for global climate strikes, and also remembering the devastating typhoons that hit, holding vigils, fundraisers, and getting the communities together and partnering with organizations on the ground so that we can get the funds that all of y'all have collected to the people on the ground who need it most. So in just short, in a quick presentation from this, we were just wanted to share the work of KA as far as environmental work goes. One thing that KA launched, of course, we're Kabataan Alliance now. Last November, when we were responding to Al, we wanted to remember the name of Kapit Bisig, where youth linking arms, and so we developed our Kapit Bisig relief program, and we were able to work with National Alliance for Filipino Concerns, and of course through their Bayanihan Relief as well. And for us, is through our Kapit Bisig relief program, again, we were able to respond not just to all, but we look to respond and support the Philippines for future disasters and calamities that may hit, and also to help address and support the most impacted communities. So, yep. For Please join the Kapit Bisig relief program if y'all ever want to get involved. So, yeah, we're gonna move on and go to our speakers. So I wanna first introduce our first speaker, um, and also one of our co-moderators. Her name is Beverly Longid. Uh, Beverly is an Igorot Bontok Kankanae from Cordillera Mountain Province, Philippines. She's an International Solidarity Officer for Contribu, the National Alliance of Indigenous Peoples Organizations in the Philippines, and the Global Coordinator of the International Indigenous Peoples Movement for Self-Determination and Liberation. And so Beverly is gonna walk us through the general issues that are going on in the Philippines right now as far as the environment. So let's welcome Beverly.
Hello, everybody. Good morning for those who are in the Philippines, and good evening or good afternoon for those who are in the U.S. So I was tasked to give us a general overview of the Philippine environmental situation for our webinar today. So can we go to the slides? Okay. So the presentation is basically a sharing on the state of the Philippine environment in the time of COVID. This is the presentation that was made by Ibon Foundation um, yesterday as part of our celebration of Earth Day in the Philippines. So this webinar will be one of our contributions to the global celebration of April 22 as the International Earth Day movement. So if you'll notice, I'm not simply using Earth Day as Earth Day, but referring to Earth Day as a movement, because we would like to shift the focus now on its 50th anniversary, that when we speak of April 22, we're actually speaking of the people's movement, whether in the Philippines or in other parts of the world, to protect and save the environment. So thank you, Kabataan Alliance, for organizing this webinar. Can you move to the next slide? The next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the sharing that I will be doing today is basically to discuss with you in broad strokes the state of the Philippine environment coming from the findings and analysis of Ibon Foundation. So in fact, the one that I'm going to share with you is part of a series of publications since Ibon was founded. This will be the fourth of a series of publication on the topic. And for those who do not know, Ibon Foundation is a non-government organization. It is an institution that deals with people's research, no? And it's also a data bank, no? So for the next slide, if you look at the book, no, it actually has 9 chapters, and if you all of the chapters deal with specific ecosystems or environment, except for the last chapter, it will follow the same flow. Hopefully, our two main speakers will be able to give details as far as the state of each of the ecosystem from the communities that they work with. But the 9 chapters would deal with 3 questions, and we will see it later on in the presentation. One is, what is the state of each ecosystem? And we will see that consistently in all of this, from the data and experience of the Filipino people, the state of each ecosystem is critical. No? Second, who are responsible? Who are the culprits? And we will see also consistently that the culprits, the ones who are responsible for environmental destruction, one, are corporations. And when we speak of corporations, we speak of big corporations, transnational corporations, multinational corporations, oligarchs, traditional politicians, and a few individuals. And the third is, it will also answer, how is government responsible, or how is government accountable for the destruction that's happening in our environment. And we will also find out that consistently government is accountable and responsible through neoliberal policies that promote foreign investment, that promote pro-business activities, but are also anti-environment. So in all of this, and hopefully our next speakers will discuss this. Next slide. But before we go into looking into specific issues involving the Philippine environment, it is also necessary to understand the state or the situation of wealth and inequality in the country. If you look at the slide, at the bottom portion, the red, orange, green, well, you can include the blue portion. This would indicate that majority of Filipinos actually earn an income ranging from $200 to $1,000 in a month, and a family wherein there would be 5 members. But it would be interesting to note, if you look at the left portion of the slide, that only around 6%, 0.6% and 0.04% of the population would earn, this is in dollars, $100,000 a month to $1 million, or over $1 million respectively. So why am I saying this? It is very important because, next slide, if we look at the top richest people in the country, all of these people, or the families they belong to, actually gain their wealth from environmental destruction. And they're involved in real estate, wherein vast tracts of lands, even agricultural lands, are converted into housing or enclaves for the rich and famous. They are also involved in ports development, wherein much of this would also involve, how do you call this, reclamation of important coastal areas. They're also involved in power or energy generation. which are largely very destructive: oil, mining, and agriculture. So when we speak of agriculture, this is largely promotion of agribusiness or commercial plantations, which are also largely monocrop plantations that are also heavily dependent on commercial inputs, fertilizers and pesticides that are harmful to the environment and of course to the health of people. No? Next slide. So I'm going to focus on 2 or 3 major aspects that contribute to the destruction of the Philippine environment. And the first one would be on the issue of forests and deforestation. Um, the topic of forest is very important because in the case of the Philippines, around 30% or at least 30% of the Philippine population would actually depend on forests in terms of livelihood. And around 50% of that number are indigenous peoples. And it is very, very alarming to look at the data. This is government data, huh? From 27.5 million hectares in terms of forest cover, in 2015, we only have around 7 million hectares in terms of forest cover. And in terms also of its importance, if you will, since we are now in the time of COVID, research and studies would indicate that many of the new diseases that we're experiencing now, like the coronavirus, it's because of the destruction of the forest, wherein new pathogens are being released in the environment because of the rapid or unnatural destruction of forests. But it's also very important to note that most probably the cure or the solution to the COVID pandemic would also come from the forest. But unfortunately, the rate of destruction of the forest is very alarming. And this is not only seen in the Philippines. This is seen in other countries in Asia, especially Indonesia, at the same time in Latin America, with the very fast, rapid destruction of the Amazon. And with deforestation, next slide, would also come the degradation of land. And with this, it also impacts on the quality of the soil, and with the very fast degrading quality of the soil, our agricultural production, our agricultural industry is also adversely affected. Therefore, it becomes also now an issue of food security or food sovereignty. Now, how does government respond in all of this? No? Next slide. If you look at government's priorities, instead of addressing the issue of environmental destruction, actually, the way government responds is not to save the environment, but rather to further destroy the environment. So if we look at the left side, no, of the slide, this actually indicates, shows you 8, 10 priority project of government in terms of hydro energy development. And if you look at the areas of construction, these are areas wherein largely indigenous peoples are located. Therefore, this would result again to further dislocation of indigenous peoples and further destruction of ancestral lands and territories. Now, if you look at the other side of the slide, there's a photo of a forest being largely being denuded. This is not in the Philippines. This was taken in West Papua, just to show you how government or how industries would deforest areas to turn them into plantations. And this is very alarming because this is also a priority project of government wherein they plan to expand existing plantations. And other priorities would be land use conversion, as I mentioned a while ago, for real estate and infrastructure. So we have more condominiums, we have more high-rise structures, we have more malls than agricultural lands. No? And then if ever the agricultural lands that we have, these are focused on industrial plantations, wherein it promotes hybrid and genetically modified what do you call this products. Okay, next. Aside from that, the second culprit, no, in terms of activity will be large-scale mining. And large-scale mining, anywhere we go, whether it's in the Philippines, in Asia, in Africa, or Latin America, it is destructive. Very, very destructive. Why? Because large-scale mining operates not for national industrialization, but for profit. And they're able to do this in the cheapest way possible and the fastest way possible. So they don't really care about environment, no? So at the moment, we don't have, what do you call this, a pro-environment mining, or how others would call it, responsible mining. And most of the laws in the Philippines are actually geared towards this kind of mining. So we're speaking of the Philippine Mining Act of 1995. Okay, next slide. And just to tell you, mining is not only now focused or limited to lands. No, we're also having what you call this offshore mining. No, second culprit in terms of ecological disaster or environmental destruction is the issue of energy. In the case of the Philippines, most of our energy are produced by coal power plants. 78%. Of the combined rate capacity of around 20 power plants that are spread in different areas in Luzon. The picture that you're looking at on the left side of your screen is the power plant in Batangas. And then aside from that, if you look at the slide, oh no, you call it slide? The table below is that aside from coal, you would also have contributing to the destruction of the environment are different kinds of energy generation projects. And you would look at geothermal and hydro, as we have discussed, also contribute to this kind of destruction. Okay, so next slide. So all of this, the land conversion, energy, mining, etc., has put the Philippines in the top 5, in terms of classification on climate change disasters. So the data would combine, the number, not only in terms of death, but also on the economic destruction or economic impact of such disasters that people feel for a period of time. I think you're more familiar with this because you have already participated in relief and aid efforts to victims of typhoons in the past. So this is the state, of the Philippine environment. It's critical. And we expect more destruction because of government's policies and with the push also of private sector. But I hope at the end of this webinar, we will look at the issue of environment. We will look at the issue of climate change or climate disaster, not only from the perspective of environment, but look at it from the perspective of human rights, look at it from the perspective of people's rights. Especially now that not only activists, but even environmental activists are being targeted, They are vilified, they are criminalized because of their advocacy. And just recently, the first days of April, if you haven't heard, the indigenous peoples who were barricading in Nueva Vizcaya in Bidipio against the continued operation of Oceana Gold, a Canadian company that its license to operate expired June last year. So since June last year, the communities affected have been barricading to prevent the operations of Oceana Gold. April 4 this year, in the middle of COVID, in the middle of the lockdown and the quarantine, government deployed more than 100 policemen to violently disperse this barricade, wherein the communities that are affected by OceanaGold's operation have not given their free prior informed consent for the company to operate. And we are seeing this also in different parts of the country. In Samar, wherein in the middle of COVID, mining companies what do you call this? Chinese companies are entering and deloading tons of ore, also in Antique and in all of this, no, in the middle of lockdown, and then now they're also being charged with various criminal offenses. Next slide. I think this will be my last point. Many of us would hear that in the middle of the COVID crisis, something good came out of it because all of a sudden, you know, the waters are clearing up, like they have said in Venice, in India, because of the clearer air. People now can see the Himalayas, which previously they did not see. But I would like to take uh, uh, that as a sign that it's not yet too late to defend and protect the environment, because this is still a sign that our environment is capable of healing. So while we are in lockdown 24/7, it's about time that probably we also have to think up of other ways, no, to further protect the environment and forward recommendations or alternatives to the existing policies and paradigms in relation to environment. So as the what do you call this? The placard says, we will not go back to normal as it used to be, but we need to change what was normal before. So what we need now is system change, not climate change. So with that, I hope I've given you an overview of the state of the Philippine environment. Thank you, and good afternoon and good morning to all.
Muted claps for Bev for their wonderful presentation. We're gonna, all the Q&As are actually gonna be after all of the presentations. So we're gonna have like a beefy 20-minute one at the end. So we're gonna go on to our next speaker. Next slide. So our next speaker is Rius Valle, who's 29 years old, of the Mandaya people, has a Bachelor's of Science in Community Development from the University of Southeastern Philippines, Davao City, where they currently reside. Rios is the Mindanao spokesperson of the Save Our Schools Network and advocacy officer of the Children's Rehabilitation Center in Southern Mindanao region. Let's give it up for Rios.
Hello, guys. Good morning to all. Good evening to the rest of the world. I'm Rius, and from Save Our Schools Network. I will be giving you a 20-minute discussion with regards to the impacts of climate crisis, environmental destruction to the indigenous people, to the youth, especially to the youth, and how are we defending it. So, is my slide okay, Matt?
Rios, we're ready for you to share your screen.
Yeah. So, are you seeing this?
Hindi.
No? Wait. Share screen. Wait, sorry. There. Okay. Thank you, John. Okay. So, is everyone seeing this?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So it will be a very fast presentation. There are a lots of photos that are that I am warning everyone because it contains the graphic photos. So I'll begin. Just a quick background. No, the Philippines, especially in Mindanao, is very rich in natural resources. And we can see a lot from rivers, from the mountains, from trees, even mineral deposits, and especially the rich culture of the Filipinos and indigenous people all over the country, especially in the Philippines and in Mindanao. So since then, the indigenous people in the Philippines are known to be are known to have a very strong fighting stance against environmental destruction, especially against destructive mining, plantations, and logging concessions. So just quick, if everyone doesn't know about the LUMAD yet, the LUMAD is part of the 8 major indigenous group in the Philippines. Out of 14 to 17 million indigenous people in the Philippines, 61% are the LUMAD. We don't have yet very specific number of population, because apparently until now the LUMAD is one of the most marginalized sector, and have received less to none at all basic social services from the government. So Mindanao, considered as the last frontier of natural wealth. Even the U.S. State Department also said that Mindanao has trillion worth of mineral resources. A lot of that resources are through mineral resources, mining, trees, forests, land, ancestral land are being taken from the indigenous people. So actually, Beverly already made some points with regards to how rich is the Mindanao. But here we can see that Mindanao is 4th in copper deposit, 3rd in gold deposits, 5th in nickel, 6th in chromite in the world. So that's how rich Mindanao in terms of mineral deposits. That's just a very tiny point, because I haven't included yet the coal deposits, everything. So you can see how very rich Mindanao is, especially with vast lands by farmers and ancestral lands of the indigenous people. But here in Mindanao, most of that lands are being converted into monocrop plantations. In Davao region alone, there is 150,000 hectares converted into plantations, agribusiness plantations in Davao region alone. Right now, the Mindanao has 700,000 of lands in 5 regions covered with agricultural plantations, primarily for export. It means that most of the crops planted and harvested in Mindanao doesn't go to the Filipinos, but more on through export from different countries. Another thing is the Duterte administration also threatened to expand 1 million hectares of palm oil plantation and others. So this is the Pantaron Range. If you know about Sierra Madre, Pantaron is called the Sierra Madre of the Mindanao. Pantaron is the one of the last remaining intact rainforests in Mindanao. It's home for the Philippine eagle, and right now it's being threatened by large-scale mining corporations. There's Metalors Consolidated Incorporation, one Compostela Valley Minerals Incorporation, and Philmengdi, a Chinese mining corporation, threatening to extract mineral resources at Pantaron Range. So, according to the DNR, Mines and Geosciences Bureau data, there are around 519 mining tenements in the Philippines, and 128 of it are extracting in Mindanao, covering around 300,000 hectares. Although I doubt this is the only data on mining in the Mindanao, because a lot of corporations in Mindanao have either what do you call this, expired applications but still operating. Others are operating without consent or without consent with the government. So there are a lot of mining corporations in Mindanao. In Caraga alone, there are 15 coal operating contracts, just in one region. So that's how plundered the Mindanao is in terms of mining, plantation. And just a quick context, Mindanao is considered as the deadliest country for environmental defenders way back 2018, since 20 out of 30 environmental defenders in the Philippines are from Mindanao, and most of them are indigenous people. That is why, because of this destruction, because of all this attempt to grab our ancestral lands, we put up schools. Lumad, communities from different regions all over Mindanao have set up schools as an assertion for the right to self-determination and this assertion for the right to education. But unfortunately, this effort of the indigenous people are seen by this government as a threat. Way back 2017, President Rodrigo Duterte issued a threat to bomb Lumad schools, and now we have witnessed very unrelenting attacks among school students and teachers. What you right now, we will see several images, disturbing images of attacks on schools in Mindanao. Burning of school in Sultan Kudarat, and along with several households. Right now, the community is a ghost town. Indigenous people residing in this community are displaced in different barangays. Killing of Obelio Bayao, a student of Salumpungan in Talaingo, Davao del Norte, was killed September 5, after 3 months after Duterte said to bomb Lumad schools in Mindanao. Lumad's children are being tortured, burned alive in Compostela Valley. Students are being killed. No, even Lumad students in Department of Education schools, public schools, are not spared from these attacks. Junmar Acto was a 15-year-old Lumad student. He was branded as an NPA child soldier, where in fact he is actually a grade 8 student in Ricardo Ipong National High School in Makilala, North Cotabato. Killing of PTCA, Parent Teachers Community Association, President of Mindanao Interfaith Services Foundation Incorporated, or MISFI, Beverly. She was killed while her daughter, a student of a Lumad school in MISFI, also was hit but survived. She was killed while they were actually buying school supplies for the opening of last year. 2018. So another child, a Lumad child, was hurt after a former barangay kagawad, Carlito, was killed by suspected military agents in Agusan, along with this list of mass surrenders. Actually, the government said that there are now 10,000 NPAs or rebels who have surrendered to the government. But based on our documentation, the Save Our Schools Network documented around 4,000 victims of mass and fake surrenders. Mostly are community members, students, including students, teachers, and parents of different Lumad communities. Red tagging of activists, vilification of human rights defenders. What you see in the wanted poster is 15 Lumad defenders, including myself. The police have posted several posters in Davao City, in Mindanao. Even just this January 2020, posters of teacher Chad Book of the Alcadev and Rural Missionaries of the Philippines Coordinator Wings are being disseminated by the PNP as communists or terrorist individuals in Cagayan de Oro, Davao, and Agusan. Encampment, even today, at this moment where we are supposedly staying at home and we are supposedly mitigating the spread of COVID, the military has not stopped in their attacks in communities, in camping in different communities, in schools, food and economic blockade in communities are continue to happen in Mindanao, evacuation, forcible displacement. And right now, the recent attacks are 55 Lumad schools in October were forcibly closed. These schools are operated by Salumpungan schools, 54 by the way. A coordinator of Rural Missionaries of the Philippines, Literacy and Numeracy, Melissa, was arrested and later tagged and branded as a communist leader. But she is actually a member of Rural Missionaries of the Philippines. Alcadev and Trips in October were also threatened for closure, and a nun, 80-year-old nun of the Rural Missionaries of the Philippines, were filed with trump-up charges of perjury. So last year was a very tough year for the Lumads and environmental defenders, and by the opening of the year, last January, the evacuation center in Davao City was raided by around 50 paramilitary members with civilian clothes military members and police, raided, and they destroyed the gates of the evacuation center, forcibly entered the compound and threatened Lumad Lumad evacuees in UCC Piharan. Meanwhile, also in February, we've received alert that several students were hurt after military opened fire at a community in Agusan and Lianga, Surigao del Sur, hurting children and community members. After that, the Lumad in that community, Surigao, decided to evacuate. In March, while their schools, community schools of Trips and Alcadev are also being threatened by the Department of Education. Also in March, we have received reports that a community technical college in southeastern Mindanao, the CTCSM in Compostela Valley, it's the first Lumad college in Mindanao, is being threatened of closure. Parents were gathered in the barracks and they are threatened by the military and the local government units to get their children who are enrolled in this school. Right now we see, right now we are hearing also, we are continuously receiving reports that students are being uh, uh, uprooted in their communities by their local government, by the mayors, and they are threatened if they would not stop from entering or from schooling. No, they will be their 4 piece will be withdrawn. That's a 4 piece is a government conditional cash transfer, giving around 4,000 a month to the marginalized communities. But they said that they would stop giving 4 piece for families who are enrolled in Lumad schools in Mindanao. And last, uh, also in March. It's actually March. There is now in what do you call this? There is now an enhanced community quarantine being implemented way back March 14. But on March 19, the Armed Forces of the Philippines illegally arrested the sister of Congresswoman Euphemia Kulyamat of the Bayan Muna Party List, the Lumad Congresswoman. Her sister was illegally arrested and detained by the Armed Forces of the Philippines way back March 19. Overall, the attacks on Lumad have reached around 161 school closure, forcible closure of schools, disenfranchising 5,000 students. So when we say about the impacts, it's right now children are not being spared from military attacks brought by the continuous effort of the government to plunder ancestral land, not just in Mindanao, but also in different parts of the country, in the different parts of the world. Not just It's not just human rights. It's not just about the human rights of the children. Right now, what is being destroyed is not just the environment, but also the culture of the indigenous people and the future of the next generation. Because that's why we build the schools in the first place. We want to secure a world where the children of the future will still be able to uh, have fresh air, fresh rivers, vast lands for agriculture, not destruction brought by mining plantations and logging concessions and energy projects, just like such as dams. We want to secure a future for the children that is full of dignity. So right now, the Lumad continues to fight. And here in Metro Manila, I am with actually 85 indigenous children and teachers currently taking refuge in UP Diliman amid the COVID pandemic, while 50 students and teachers are also taking refuge in Cebu. 500 students, Lumad individuals are taking refuge in Davao City. So why are we doing this? Why are we here? It's because we want the world to know that children are fighting. Children are fighting for their future. Children are fighting for climate justice. Children are fighting for their rights as human beings. And what we have done so far is the highest form of children's expression for in their fight for their right to education. We've set up a Bakwit school in Metro Manila, Cebu, and Davao City as part of a protest and a call for all of the children all over the world to protect, no, defend by all means necessary. When Greta Thunberg decided to stop schooling because she wanted to save the environment, these children are taking on the streets, no, since then, no, to send us a message that we could no longer wait. Children should also join in the fight, because if they don't, they would no longer have a future to fight for. They will no longer have a, a land to till in the future if all of this will be destroyed. So the impacts of climate crisis, environmental destruction will is not only limited, you know, to fewer resources, fewer water, clean water, air, but we can see that all of us are affected. Right now, the Beverly mentioned earlier that COVID and the pandemic is an effect of climate crisis. We are experiencing it as early as today, and we fear that these children will see worse of the worst in a few years if this will not be mitigated. So that is why right now we are continuing this fight. We are here in Metro Manila, challenging, yes, because aside from the trauma they have experienced in the communities right now, we are actually facing more of mental concerns in the Bakwit school due to the lockdown. And we hope, and we are calling also different networks, friends, and fellow advocates all over the world to continue supporting the Bakwit School in Manila, Cebu, and Davao City. Yes, we are in need of your dire support. We are in need of food for 500 in Davao City, 50 in Cebu, and 85 in Metro Manila. We will not stop from fighting for our right to education and for fighting for climate justice. That's all the salamat sa tanan. We are open up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mute clap for Rios.
I hope we.
Yeah. So we're a little behind, but I want to, again, there'll be a 20-minute Q&A at the end of after all of our speakers. So, yeah, so, but also want to just, let's go forward. But again, if y'all need to take care of yourselves, I think if you need to take a deep breath right now, that was a lot of information. And also, you know, we heard a lot of, you know, hard information with our, you know, friends, our indigenous friends who are being attacked every day. So, but want to welcome our next speaker, Casey Cruz. Casey Ann Cruz is 21, is from Canta, Rizal, and has a Bachelor of Science in Development and Communication from the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, and she is the spokesperson and regional coordinator for Bayan TK, convener of Tulungan sa Taal Network, and lead convener of No to Kaliwa Laiban Dam Network. And she's gonna let us know about some of the environmental impacts in their areas. So let's give it up for Casey.
Hello.
Hi, Casey, we can hear you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good day. I hope that you're all doing well in your respective countries as we face this pandemic crisis. So, first of all, I would like to thank everyone because through your bayanihan, even though you're far from us, we were able to cater the communities in need in Batangas who were victims of the Taal eruption. So, I'll be sharing some of the insights in the situation of Batangueños during the um, during and after the Mount Taal erupted. For now, I'll be introducing to you the Tulungan sa Taal Network. It is an organization together with Bayan Timog Katagalugan and other ecumenical formations and communities we have reached through the relief efforts. This network aims to assist and conduct relief and rehabilitation efforts, establish connections for local government units, and eventually, um, we're trying to initiate plans and propose policies for the Batangueños, most especially on community-based disaster response. So, taal sa atin ng tulungan means it is innate for us to help one another. Taal means innate in Batangueño dialect, hence Taal eruption has proved the spirit of bayanihan lies and still being practiced by the Filipinos. So, on the first slide, you can see the introduction during the eruption of the Taal. I will tell you the story when our experience when it has erupted. Our team were heading for relief operations in Mindoro for affected communities of Typhoon Tisoy and Ursula. When we saw the Taal erupted from afar, it was on January 12 when we saw Taal's spew gases, ashes, leaving clouds dark, and the ashes even reached the roads of Mindoro Island, which is a little bit far from the province of Batangas. So Fevox called it as the phreatic eruption. It did not release any lava, but its eruption has released lots of gases and ashes in the communities. So since the fourth quarter of 2019, the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, or the PHIVOLCS, has been releasing alerts, but it was not properly disseminated to the locals. Around these Taal volcano islands resides communities of peasants, farmers, and fisher folk. And aside from online and televised alerts, there has been very few efforts to reach out for the locals and physically inform them about the possible eruption and the changes in the volcanic activities. So, come January 12, it came as a surprise for the communities, and they were all in a hurry to evacuate the Taal Volcano Island. We learned and realized that the key for this disaster prevention, such as in the Taal experience, of course, is science communication, because the information has to reach the community. The technical terms and alerts released by the FIVOC should have been disseminated well. So the communities could have prepared. We also learned from them during the relief operations that we conducted that the locals, the fisher folks, the farmers, have their own ways, traditional ways, which they learned from their ancestors of their traditional ways that they learned in their ancestors in determining the status or alert level of the Taal by merely observing the nature, such as the level of the lake water. Whenever it rises, there will be a threat of eruption. But the problem is, this information that the FIVOX was able to gather upon observing the activities of the volcano has not reached the communities. So in January 12, we immediately released public announcements calling for donations and support for the affected communities who also needed to evacuate. Okay, next slide. Next slide. So the Taal eruption has displaced about 425,000 individuals, while these 180,000 individuals chose to come over to their friends or relatives' houses. Some evacuated to nearby provinces such as Laguna and Cavite. People were also complaining because most especially those who live in the Taal Volcano Island, since it was put under total lockdown and there is high military presence, their houses were left behind and their animals that they used for their livelihood were left stranded in the volcano. So they were trying to enter the community under the permanent danger zone, but to no avail. So as there are videos online posted online where you can see that many locals have been crying and negotiating with the armed military forces to let them in the Taal Volcano Island. So each day has been very hard for the families as the alert level continuously rises and they have left most of their things and their livelihood in the island. So next, please. Um, Please go back to the first slide. Fourth slide. So together with the organizations and ecumenical formations in Southern Tagalog and the other initiatives, we came up with a case study on disaster justice and government response on Taal eruption and the needs of the people. So after the relief efforts, we're trying to establish a campaign, particularly focusing on how did the government responded in this fiasco, in this disaster. We tried our best to conduct small group discussions and consultations to the affected communities, which allowed us to reach 10,000 families and local government units. So we found out that the 500,000 evacuees, the Department on Social Welfare and Development, or the DSWD, is the one responsible for relief efforts, for evacuation center management, and other immediate assistance for the communities, has released a budget of about 7 million. But this budget has only reached 96,000 individuals. If we calculate it on the daily basis, with the 2 months on the Taal Relief and Rehabilitation Immediate Response, it only catered about 50 families in a day. And that's very slow. And it clearly shows that there is a very low response and attention in times of calamities. And we could also remember how the government responded during the Typhoon Haiyan, where lots of donations were not properly rendered to the affected communities. And most of these donations were found out on a storage being and just wasted and not used by the communities. So on our small group discussions, we tried to discuss about disaster justice or just like climate justice. That has about the lack of accountability of the government and government units and national agencies to address the needs of the people in hard times and in times that the people are more vulnerable in crisis brought by natural disasters. We have to acknowledge also that these people were pushed and were required, or at least they have left no option, and they decided to live in the Taal Volcano Island because of underlying economic ill. Because there is a class struggle or there is a problem, there is a poverty existing, which brought them to the option that they will reside in the island or the Taal Volcano Island despite the awareness or the knowledge that this is more this will bring them to more vulnerability into hazards and risks. So these Batangueños, most especially those who reside in the island, are mostly peasant sectors, farmers, and fisher folk, because that is where they can have their livelihood. They could fish, they could farm, since we also found out that the vegetation around the Taal volcano island has a potential for better vegetation because of the ashes that has been spewed in it. Next slide. So on the last week of January, here comes the proposal of the national government unit to have a permanent ban, or declare the Taal volcano island and the 14-kilometer radius around the island as a permanent danger zone. So therefore, um, this permanent danger zone will no longer be available for livelihood and settlement for the communities that have evacuated from the island. But the problem is there is no clear plan or program for resettlement and rehabilitation of these communities. We will then find out that behind this proposal is the interest to implement the impending Metro Taal Tagaytay development project, introduced even before the Marcos regime as part of the Calabarzon project. So this permanent danger zone has been proposed and floated by the DILG, or the local government agency, that it will be possibly implemented to give way to the success of the Metro Taal Tagaytay development project. So this project is um, part of the Build program of the Duterte administration and will be funded by China loans. So this Metro Taal Tagaytay development project will also part of the regional development plan for 2016 to 2022. So the question is, for the people, where will they be able to come back to their livelihood? Will they be able to come back to their communities, to their traditional lifestyle, to their homes? So this permanent danger zone will also allow the entry of private sectors, converting the Taal Lake and the agricultural lands surrounding it into ecotourism and leisure zone, to maximize tourism potentials and development projects in the lakeside, as mentioned in the regional development plan signed and approved by the Duterte administration. And then here comes land conversion and profiteering scheme sponsored by the government agencies, while leaving the interests of the people behind. So the problem is, up until now, they have not found, or they have not established or built any proper resettlement areas other than mga tiwangwang na pabahay, or these settlement projects that have been vacated to, because after establishing these settlement areas, the government found out that these are hazard prone or danger zone areas too. So after that, taking a deeper look into it, these people were banned in entering the Taal volcano island and will be transferred to a settlement area where it is also declared by the housing authority as a danger zone area. So what's the difference with it? Next slide. So as we coordinate with the science experts and the locals, the network found out that the agricultural lands covered by the ashes during the phreatic eruption of Taal has a potential for better agricultural purposes. So we are trying to review and adopt the disaster response of Albay, Bicol, as they were able to eventually adapt on the risk and hazard related to Mayon volcano and what in Bicol, and how are they going to prepare into its possible eruption. So what we are proposing as a network together with the locals is to establish a community-based disaster response, particularly on the Taal volcanic island, and how people can effectively adopt through their own ways through their own traditional ways in the ecosystem of the island, take care of it and utilize this for their livelihood purposes, rather than just imposing a permanent ban in the island and leaving them behind no options for accessible livelihood and safe settlement area. So before the COVID crisis, next slide please. So before the COVID crisis and lockdown on the first week of March, the national government has signed an order declaring the whole Calabarzon region under the state of calamity. According to to President Duterte, he declared state of calamity to better respond on the crisis brought by the Taal eruption. But obviously, 2 months have already passed since the eruption, and it just came to their minds that, oh, maybe it's time to declare state of calamity. And of course, together with the declaration of state of calamity is the approval of release of budget allocations for as or the calamity funds that we're talking about. So we're figuring out some information because there have been rumors that this state of calamity was declared to fast-track development projects in the southern Tagalog region under the Build program. So this includes after the declaration of the state of calamity in the whole Calabarzon region, um, the Armed Forces of the Philippines also announced the additional battalion of military forces that will be deployed in the region. So what we're thinking about is that why these battalions of armed military forces in the region while declaring a state of calamity for the Taal eruption crisis response. The problem is this development projects also includes the Metro Taal Development Project, the Kaliwakanan Laiban Dam that will damage the Sierra Madre mountain range, the Batangas International Port that will, according to the regional development plan, it will serve as a gateway to Asia. And so where hundreds of thousands of Tagalogs and citizens of Southern Tagalog region will be displaced while giving way to these development projects. So all of these projects will also be funded by the China loan alongside with development aggression. And of course, obviously, the intervention of armed forces of the Philippines in ST alone in the rural communities are targeted for the implementation of land conversion, development projects, and to intimidate citizens in the rural communities for them not to go against their proposals of these projects. So no one will interfere in their programs. So right now, since we're facing in the pandemic crisis, we were not able to go continuously with the projects, but we are encouraging science experts, youth who are conducting research studies to go and participate with us to know more about this the Taal volcano island and its potential, because according to the citizens and the communities we have talked with, their minimum demand is to at least they could come back to the Taal volcano island and to have their livelihood in the island or in the premises, because whenever they are transferred to resettlement areas, there will be no sustainable livelihood program for them. Most especially because most of these citizens have not finished their studies, and this is the best way they could earn for their daily living. So right now, we're still organizing communities and youth from and various sectors to participate. Aside from rehabilitation efforts, is to devise a community-based program on disaster response and to flourish and further understand the situation around the Taal volcano island, because it was just 2 days ago the FIVOX has released an announcement that there has been observed changes in the activities of the Taal volcano. So it has left, it still has threats of possible eruption. So right now, in the Tulungan sa Taal network, we still have to be vigilant about the Metro Taal Development Project, the proposal of permanent danger zone, and what will be the program for the people who have been evacuated and are still right now, who are still in the covered courts and evacuation centers, and they are also facing the pandemic crisis brought by COVID-19. So we're also proposing in the network that more than anything else, more than these development initiatives, we have always to consider the participation of the people, and it should be from the people. It should be consulted by the people who will be affected and who will benefit this project. So yes, would that be all? So if you have any other questions, I can accommodate those later.
Great. Let's give it another mute clap for Casey. We're gonna take a 5-minute cultural break, meaning we're gonna have a little presentation of a song, and I'm gonna have Chrissy, our Kabataan Alliance External Vice President, let us know what it's about.
Hi, everything. Hi, everyone. It's Chrissy again. So while they get the cultural set up, so the cultural isn't going to be a live performance, but a video. So the video is a collaboration between members of Kabataan Alliance as well as KALIKASAN, People's Network for the Environment that is based in the Philippines, on a song, a cover of a song called Naglahong Paraiso, or Faded Paradise. So the song is about somebody that is mourning the fading away of the paradise, which is the Philippines. So the song just consists of her of the person reminiscing about what that paradise used to be like. And we will post up the English translation on the chat or on the notes in a bit if folks want to know what the actual translation is. So I'll give it away to our tech person to do it. Hopefully this will work.
nais na nais kong tinigin ng pag-ibig ang lalanta ng kalikasan, pamana sa kabataan ang kanyang mga biyaya at kagandahan. Nais kong manumbalik ang dating makulay na paligid. Sa puso ay muling pauspungin ang muntingang daigdig. Sa puso ay muling pauspungin ang luntiang daigdig. Sa puso ay muling pauspungin ang luntiang daigdig.
All right, let's give that a clap. I love the mute claps. It's dope. So we're gonna continue on, and again, we'll post the translations as well on the slideshow or on the chat as well. But we're gonna continue on for we have a couple more speakers left. Is this the slide? Next slide. Okay, so we're gonna introduce our next speaker, Francesca Edralin. Francesca is the External Relations Director for Philippine Cultural Society at the George Washington University and a KA member. She is an international affairs major with a focus on environmental studies. Francesca is the student ambassador of George Washington's sustainability program, the vice president of George Washington UNICEF, and the director of global outreach for Think Ocean. Let's give it up for Francesca and take it away.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Francesca. Thank you to KA for letting me speak on this call. My presentation will just be a little brief because it was put together very last minute, but pretty much I just wanted to share my experiences as a Filipino American environmental activist, as well as tied to the greater youth environmental movement in the US. You can go to the next slide. So just a little bit of background about me. I'm a first generation Filipino American. Oh, you can go to the one before that. I was born and raised in New Jersey. I study international affairs with a focus on environmental studies at the George Washington University, which is located in Washington, D.C. I'm a proud Kabataan Alliance member and external relations director for the Philippine Cultural Society. That's George Washington's Filipino cultural org, and I help to foster the relationship that PCS has with Kabataan Alliance, because not too many Filipino orgs on the East Coast work with Kabataan Alliance, and we were one of the first, so hopefully we get to branch out to other Filipino orgs on the East Coast. And I'm super passionate about environmental advocacy and justice. What makes me very passionate about the environment is that it's an issue that affects us all. I mean, the earth is what we all have in common. And after traveling to various countries around the world, I've kind of learned that it's frustrating because it's the world's poorest countries that are disproportionately affected the most by the actions of the world's richest, as the previous speakers have talked about, especially in the Philippines. I remember when I visited my family back in the Philippines a couple years back, reading a magazine, and the headline was saying that the Philippines is going to be the #1 country impacted by climate change. And these conversations aren't talked about enough. A lot of folks in the US, especially people who are not as impacted by climate change firsthand, don't really see how devastating climate change is for so many communities around the world, especially indigenous communities, and especially our home country of the Philippines. Okay, the next slide is just going to be talking about, I guess, my work in environmental activism and have gotten involved. So what I've done in activism, I'm the director of global outreach for Think Ocean, which is an international network of environmental groups in over 20 countries. So my role with Think Ocean is really cool because I get to communicate with environmental leaders from all around the world. We have chapters in Africa, Europe, Asia. We even have a chapter in the Philippines. And it's really cool to see environmental activists who are leading the environmental movement in their local communities, participating in grassroots activism. And it's really inspiring to know that there are youth all over the world who are fighting for the same cause. And we actually had a digital advocacy campaign today for Earth Day. And it's really great to be connected to youth environmentalists all over the world. I'm also the student ambassador for Sustainable GW, so I also am involved in local activism on my school's campus. And so this involves me helping to plan programming for students regarding climate activism, sustainability panels, programming in the academic department, as well as pushing the student body's campaign for divestment for fossil fuels, because a lot of national universities invest money in fossil fuels, and it's been an increasing movement around the country that universities have been trying to push to be carbon neutral or divest entirely from fossil fuels, and that movement is hugely led by student campuses, and so I help to foster that movement as well. Going to school in DC, I'm also a consistent participant in climate strikes. They happen weekly. Last September, I actually got to strike next to Greta Thunberg. If you folks can see the photo in the bottom right, I actually took that photo. And we were striking in front of the White House, and I got to meet her. It was absolutely incredible. I also participated in the Youth Global Climate Strike that happened worldwide. And also in September, I got to be interviewed, and it was live streamed on the Climate Strike Instagram. I also strike with Fridays for Future. If you folks have heard of Fridays for Future, it's a movement founded by Greta Thunberg, and pretty much the movement tries to reserve every Friday for climate strikes, and so youth all over the world don't go to school or skip their plans to strike for climate, just to emphasize just how important and urgent of an issue climate change is, and to hold their officials accountable. And the Fridays for Future movement is huge in DC, and so I've missed some classes to strike with Fridays for Future, and we'll go to congressmen, we'll protest in front of the White House. I actually got a chance to film a documentary on the Fridays for Future movement. I can send a link to the documentary after my little session here. And it was really cool because the people who I interviewed, they've been some of the most prominent environmental activists within the country. One of the girls who I interviewed actually last year, Fridays for Future was awarded by the UN the Champions of the Earth Award, and this girl in front of the entire United Nations declined the award because she felt that the Fridays for Future movement shouldn't get an award for being the champions of the earth, but rather everyone should be a champion of the earth. And so rather she felt that the award kind of put the responsibility on youth, and so that was a really incredible and bold speech to make, and I got to interview her as well. Also, a couple years back, I was a delegate for the 2017 United Nations Youth Assembly on Climate Change, and so environmental activists from all over the world, ages 16 to 29, came together for at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and we all discussed solutions to climate change in our own respective countries. And it was really cool to see people from all over the world come together for a unifying cause. I think that's what makes climate change such an important issue, is because it affects all of us. All countries have their own unique perspective on climate change, have their own issues regarding climate change, especially the Philippines. And when everyone comes together to talk about the greater issue, it's just such a unifying feeling. And that's why I think climate change is such an important issue across the board. And then this summer, I will be interning for USAID, and I will be specifically working with grassroots projects in third world countries that work towards climate change. And so I get to work with those communities as well as help to monitor projects that are happening in those communities. You can go to the next slide. And so there's so many ways to advocate for the environment. I want to emphasize that there's no one size fits all journey or path to get involved in environmental justice. Climate change is an issue that affects every person in every industry in a different way. I think everyone kind of has their own unique climate story regarding how climate change has impacted their own maybe environment, their local community, or maybe folks have family members back home in the Philippines who have been directly impacted by climate change. And so everyone has a unique story to tell, and everyone kind of has different interests that may lie within climate change. And so share your story. I think that everyone has a unique story. For example, for me, growing up in New Jersey, I didn't really understand the effects of climate change because drought wasn't an issue. There was greenery all around me. There wasn't a lot of food insecurity around where I lived. And so I didn't really understand the true impacts of climate change until I went back home to the Philippines, visited other third world countries, and I just saw how devastating of an issue climate change is and how it really impacts the world's poorest. And everyone should be striving to make better impact on this planet because of that. And so everyone has different interests and skills, and I think every industry can be connected to environmental justice in some way. For example, me studying international affairs, I am interested in the political side of climate change and the global advocacy side of climate change. But for example, if you're studying pre-med or want to become a nurse, there are lots of intersections with environmental justice and public health. A lot of the world's greatest public health issues are exacerbated by climate change and environmental insecurities. As well as, for example, if you're trying to become an engineer, there are so many potential innovations that can be made in the engineering field to further the climate movement. If you're interested in business, corporate sustainability has become a much bigger thing lately for businesses. And so regardless of what you're passionate about, what you want to study, there's always an intersection with the environment, which is really cool. And so I think everyone can get into the environment in however way they're comfortable with or where they feel that their skills can be best leveraged to. And amidst this COVID-19 pandemic, we're all at home, but there's still many ways you can still contribute. Just because the earth is kind of allowed to breathe again with everyone staying at their homes doesn't mean that climate change isn't a super important issue still, because of course we'll be coming back and going back to like our normal ways once the pandemic is over. And so some of the ways that you can get involved in environmental activism still in your homes is through weekly digital strikes. For example, Fridays for Future, they do weekly strikes on Fridays, but just because we're all at home, they doesn't mean that they have stopped striking. Folks have just been posting on social media instead. There are also plenty of opportunities for you to reduce your carbon footprint at home, whether that's making sure you have no food waste, making sure that you turn off all your lights and only use energy when you need to, saving up on water, supplies, donating to environmental organizations back at home. There's so many ways that you can still advocate for the environment, as well as from a political standpoint. Now it's more important than ever with the 2020 election coming up that we elect officials who will prioritize the environment and not cut back on environmental legislation. As the US is one of the top polluters and greenhouse gas emitters in the world, it is so important. It's so important. I can't emphasize this enough, that we restructure the way that we go about environmental activism. And in order to do that, one of the biggest ways is to elect officials who will advocate for a structural change, for example, the Green New Deal, and really ensure that the structures are put in place so that we can overall become a more sustainable society for the longest term. That's pretty much all I have to say from my end. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I will be happy to answer them in the Q&A section. And I'll send over in the chat also the link to the documentary I filmed for Fridays for Future. And I'll be helping to moderate the Q&A session as well. So you'll hear a little bit more from me later on in this panel. But thank you folks for your time, and happy Earth Day.
Thank you, Francesca. Let's give a mute clap for Francesca. And we're moving on to our, she'll be helping moderate the Q&A, so you'll hear from her more. And we're moving on to our final speaker. Our final speaker is Rafi Toralba. And Rafi is graduated from University of Wisconsin, not Washington. That's what I always think. Madison in biology and certificates in global health and Asian American studies. And last year, Rafi was a cohort member of Kabataan Alliance 2019 summer immersion trip and a former board member of MAFA, which is the Midwest Associations of Filipino Clubs out there. So let's give it up for Rafi, and yeah, let's give it up. Mute clap, mute clap.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Kabataan Alliance, for inviting me to speak on this panel. I was a little bit confused as to why I was invited, but I think it's because I do have a lot of, or some sort of experience in general organization of Filipino American youth, particularly at like the collegiate level. And so I'm really here just to talk about my participation on that summer immersion trip, in regards to what that means to me as a Filipino American, and by extension, what it would mean for other Filipino American youth. And I'll also be kind of talking about how these types of trips can really contribute to Phil-Am youth and student organizing here in the United States, whether it is for environmental justice or other sorts of struggles and issues that we face as Filipino Americans, as Americans, and how we can support Filipinos in the Philippines. So I'll just be giving a little bit of context of what the summer immersion trip actually was, and what the things were that actually drew me to it. So it was through MAFA that I first heard about the trip, first heard about Kabataan Alliance, really. And what really first drew me, my initial draw was, there's this common experience as Filipino Americans that we don't really learn our Philippine history, Filipino American history, or the current situation in the Philippines unless we actively search for it, for instance, in panels like these, or if we're even lucky enough to have someone teach it to us. So yeah, that was my initial draw. But when I was kind of looking through what this trip was about, there were some goals that they had listed. And so I picked a few of those out. So the first one I've actually highlighted is the reconnecting Filipino Americans to their roots. On my particular trip, this was through integration with farmers, indigenous folks, visiting urban poor, political prisoners, fisher folk, etc., kind of to understand what those experiences were and understand their struggles. And I'll talk a little bit about it later, but we did more than just integration. We lived with them, we slept with them, we cleaned with them, we cooked with them, we worked in their fields. It was a very close community by the end of that trip. Another goal that was really sticking out to me was defending the rights of marginalized and oppressed communities in the Philippines. This was something that our team leaders really encouraged us to do as participants, coming away from this trip, learning a lot from these communities. What do we do now that we know what's going on? And an extension of that was by educating our communities, take what we learned, take those experiences, share those stories, and bring it to our own communities. And that was really like the most important part for me, because at least on the collegiate level, it's kind of hard to organize Filipino American students in the Midwest, in our region. We don't really have a lot of access to some of the resources or literature that are, in my opinion, more readily available maybe on the West Coast or on the East Coast. And so that was one of the biggest things for me, was having the goal of educating our communities, our respective communities, especially being the only participant on this trip from the Midwest. Yeah, so we can go to the next slide. Okay. So these are a few pictures from that trip. We were visiting with people in Bataan, Samal, and Porac. And then in the bottom right picture is actually a few of us visiting with the students in the Bakwit schools at UP Diliman. Yeah, so on this trip, I was I was extremely grateful to have been able to not only integrate with them, but engage in really, really meaningful conversation with, in particular, the farmers and indigenous folks that we were staying with. We were able to share our problems in the U.S., and they in turn felt comfortable sharing their struggles as in the Philippines. And we talked about a lot of things. A lot of those things were covered in the panel by the panelists earlier today, which I'm really grateful for. They really covered a lot. But just to keep it brief, the things we talked about were like what things they have to do to make ends meet, like on top of their main source of income, which was farming. They have to do all these side hustles like washing laundry for other families, being motorcycle drivers. One was a masseuse. You know, they have to do all these other jobs just to make ends meet. And on top of that, they're also committed to organizing their communities, taking action to defend their rights, their land, and well, the rights as workers and the right to their own land. And this is both in the farming communities and for indigenous communities. And yeah, so I found all of that connection that we were able to make very, very valuable. And coming away from it, there was this common sentiment from those communities we were staying with that they were happy to know that there were Filipino Americans like me and my cohort that were coming to the Philippines to have these types of experiences in order to share them with our communities. So again, that goal of like bringing back this information to our respective communities, that was, I think, valuable for us and also very valuable for them. And to be frank, by the end of this trip, I actually returned to the US with more questions than I left with. Like I was more curious to find out, you know, why was the Philippines like this? Why are these communities not able to move forward in their struggles? But more questions in a good way, like that curiosity. And so when I came back, I revisited a lot of the history of Filipino migration in the US. And so that like revisiting of history and having had that experience in the Philippines really helped me to develop a better understanding for like the legacy of colonialism on the Philippines and on the Filipino people. And I was also able to kind of better understand where me and my generation is like where me and my generation stands in Filipino history. In that I kind of discerned that like me as a Filipino American in the United States, while I have different history, personal history, and different personal experiences from people in the Philippines, our histories are not disconnected. Our histories are very well connected. And so if you want to think about that on like the scale of, you know, the struggle, the environmental justice, youth action, climate struggle, all of that, we're not disconnected from the rest of the world. Like the Philippines, the United States, everything is connected. I think Francesca did a really good job of explaining that. And so for me, all of that really demonstrated what the importance of like collective action, doing solidarity work. It pushes me, and I think it pushes other people to think, what can we in the United States do to support those efforts that we learned about, the efforts that are taking place in the Philippines and all around the world. And we can go to the next slide. So this is kind of a very, like the slide doesn't really demonstrate what I'm kind of going to talk about, but I'll try to make it brief as well. So I can speak at least on my contribution to youth action and youth organizing. Kenneth mentioned before that I was a former board member of MAFA, and I really like to keep myself connected to MAFA, even though I was a board member like 2 or 3 years ago, because it's a community that really has a lot of potential to do a lot of big work, as if they don't, like they do stuff already, but they really have a lot of potential because it's a really big community, eager to learn more and really eager to take part in youth action. But we just sometimes we just don't know how, and we don't know how to reach out to those people who are able to help us. And so, yeah, I still really stay very connected to MAFA, and they've actually been a really big support in me being able to share my experiences from the Philippines. They've been open about wanting to learn more. And so some of the ways that I've been actually able to do that was through MAFA's regional conferences. Basically, this is probably common in other regions where you have like conferences where the collegiate orgs, the PSAs, come together and converge on one campus and learn about our identities, history, culture, everything in between, misinformation of the Filipino, etc. You know, we learn all things if we come together like that. And so through those conferences, I've been able to host and lead educational discussions with people in the Midwest who are eager to learn more, or didn't even know that there was anything going on. And actually in the slide is the picture of one of my discussions at the FACT conference at University of Illinois. That was the group that came to listen to my workshop. Some of the other ways I've been able to really share these experiences is through with the help of AB Chicago, actually. We came together, as a member of the KA summer trip group, and some others who were on AB Integs. We came together and we had a report back session where we were able to share our experiences, what we learned, what's going on, what people there are doing to fight back. And it really opened up this space for meaningful discussion amongst our own communities. It translates those conversations I had in the Philippines to our communities back home. And that sharing of information is really, like, I think, a really big part of Filipino youth in action. It's really sharing that information, educating our others, educating our communities. I've also gotten personally involved in other Kabataan Alliance's efforts. I've been really big in kind of sharing those efforts with MAFA, connecting MAFA with Kabataan Alliance in the sense that they've made KA relief funds part of their philanthropy. I've connected them with NAFCON, and so I really do want to get KA to a wider audience in the Midwest, because right now there's just a few of us in Chicago really working towards these goals. And finally, just being able to speak on this panel again is like being able to share things that I learned, or what I've done with the things that I've learned, is something I find very valuable as well. And just to wrap up, I guess, to reiterate what Kenneth talked about at the beginning of our panel, what actions Filipino youth are taking in the United States, whether it's through donating to relief funds, the Kapit Bisig relief funds, supporting efforts like NAFCON's Bayanihan campaign, holding vigils, attending global climate strike actions, going on the trips like I did. I really hope that, like, me speaking up about this stuff, every time I talk about it, I hope that it encourages someone to want to gain that experience for themselves and go on a trip like this, in order to be able to share that information with more and more and more people. And I guess I'll just close on that sentiment of solidarity with a quote from Bea, Bea Cañete, who is the regional coordinator of Kabataan Alliance, who was interviewed by Phil Starr at the New York climate strike. And the quote is this: "It's important for us Filipinos here in America to show solidarity with Filipino people back home who are at the brunt of environmental degradation. The archipelago is prone to natural disasters because of neoliberal policies that have caused a lot of man-made environmental degradation in the Philippines. We also have to show solidarity with our kababayans and allies who are fighting for the environment and defending the ancestral lands of indigenous peoples back home." Yeah, that's it for me. Thank you everyone for listening. Tried to keep it brief because I know it's been quite a long time since we started this panel. But yeah, thank you all for listening, and I guess we'll move on to the Q&A.
And we'll try to keep it. I know there's a lot of questions, but we'll try to do 10 minutes of questions before we close out. So Francesca will take it to you, and could our panelists, all our panelists, get be ready to go. Unmute yourselves when you have questions for you.
Yeah, so now we move on to the question and answer portion. A lot of folks asked questions, so Kirsty and I had to pick and choose only around 5 of them, but we kept note of all the questions so that panelists can answer the questions after this call. So no worries, all of your questions will be answered. The first question that we have is for Beverly and or Reuse, and it comes from Kevin. For the indigenous communities who are displaced because of the destruction of land, what does their source of refuge look like?
See, again, good morning, everyone. Good evening. What does their refuge look like? Most of the victims of displacement are located in or are separated in different communities. Just like in Talaingod or even in Sultan Kudarat, after the massive militarization last year, they were able to evacuate in mountainous areas of Pantaron. In Sultan Kudarat, they would go evacuate in Daguma Range. But some have evacuated in urban centers, like in Davao City, in UCC Piharan. Last year, they have evacuated Talaingod Manobos have evacuated in Tagum City. It's a banana plantation. The farmers have offered their land for the Lumad evacuees in Tagum, but was later transferred to Davao City because they were attacked by members of the police and the military. In Surigao, in the past years, they would go down as far as the Lianga city, but right now, in just a year, we've recorded that they are just in several communities where there are what do you call this access to media and access to relief. So these evacuation centers, there are only few evacuation centers in Mindanao, but most of them are in community. Their evacuation centers are community-based, gyms, churches, and even community residents. So there are a lot of big spaces for displaced persons, but it's crowded, and right now in this pandemic, it's very vulnerable. These refugees are very vulnerable for the spread of this COVID-19 pandemic. Oh, I don't know if Beverly would add to that.
Bev, merong inputs?
Oh, sorry. Well, I think Rios covered it much of it, but well, in terms of refuge, no, or sanctuary or safety for communities that are dislocated, it can take 2 forms. One would be an organized way of evacuation, wherein it's a decision by the community to move out of their community because of the need to protect the lives of the members of the community. And largely the response would depend also on the level of organization of the community. That's one. And then we have also seen experiences wherein they evacuate on their own. So either they go to residents or to communities of relatives, uh, or to communities of wherein they also have a bilateral relationship, no? To a certain extent, if the evacuation or the need to move out of the community is economic, based on the need to survive in terms of better or more livelihood, you would see most of them moving out to the town centers, to the cities, with the hope that when they go to the city, they would end up having jobs, no? But in many cases, that's not true, because when you go to the city, you will have to have certain requirements for you to be able to land a job. And unfortunately for us indigenous peoples, most of us are not formally schooled, so we fall down what to call this, the line as far as being able to land a job. Second, of course, the issue of discrimination. But in all of this, if we're speaking of refugee or sanctuary centers, of course, the issue of social services as far as water, sanitation, it's really a big problem that has to be addressed. But in the case, I think, of in the experience of our Lumad brothers and sisters, we are fortunate that we have non-government organizations that would assist them, no, in through this their life in the refugee center, in terms of hygiene, sanitation, children being able to continue their school education while in evacuation, and at the same time um, uh, building, no, their strength and unity as a community and organization. I mean, generally, I think that's how it would look like.
And we're gonna actually, there's a lot of good questions, so we're gonna go, if it's okay with y'all, to go till 8:15. But if you need to go, feel free. We have this recorded also. So yes, Francesca.
Yeah, sure. Rafi has to go right now, so she just wanted to answer one question that was directed towards her. It was from Diana, and her question was, what are you still thinking about or interrogating now that you are back in the U.S., have connected to Kabataan or more orgs?
Yeah, yeah, I gotta go quick, so I'll just answer this as best as I can, really short. So actually, like my section was really all about like educating, and like that's my way of, you know, taking part in action. But now the thing that I'm really interrogating and thinking about in my own head is like, how do I move past educating people, and how do I actually get them active? How do I get them to take action? Because that's a lot of the end of my presentations is like, this is what you can do, and this is, you can join Kabataan Alliance, and you can do this, and you can do that. But I've never really led any of those actions past the education. So that's something that I'm really like trying to grapple with, and like, how can I move past just the sharing of information and actually taking action? Do people understand? I think people will understand what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That
Okay.
was a really good response.
Yeah, thank you. I'll have to go now though. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thanks for hopping on. Okay, so the next question that we have is for Rias. It's also from Diana. The question is, what is the situation of students now that 50 Lumad schools are closed, and also now that the COVID pandemic has called for a lockdown in some parts of the Philippines?
Actually, in the communities, the Save Our Schools network is having problems with regards to monitoring human rights violations, especially among those communities where our schools are now forcibly closed. Because in the past, the teachers are the source of information with regards to human rights violation, or even the situation of the students, etc. But right now, what can we say is that most of the students, we have actually 8,000 to 10,000 LUMAD students all over Mindanao. But because of the closure, 5,000 students are being disenfranchised, and most of the students are this doesn't go to school anymore. So they are either most of them are just staying in their communities or in the evacuation centers. Some have were forced to attend public schools, even though it's so far. Uh, um, and right now, we actually have uh, uh, some reports. Well, we have received some reports that even in this pandemic, the military are calling out teachers, students, and parents, gathering them in military barracks just to threaten them that if they would not stop, or if they would still enroll their children in these LUMAD schools, uh, something will happen to them. For example, just in last month, the case of the CTCSM, a student was fetched by her mother from the school because of the enhanced community quarantine, and they were heading home to Davao City from Compostela Valley, but they were stopped and interrogated in a military detachment near Tagum City. And after they were, after the military knew they were students from the said Lumad schools, they were sent to the mayor. Then at the mayor's office, they were interrogated for 6 hours, along with the mother, and they were being coerced to drop their enrollment in the said school. So right now, most of the parents, most of the communities are afraid to even uh, uh, say, or to even divulge what have happened during those interrogations. But a lot of these parents and families being called to the military camp have said that they are uh, they were taken videos without their consent. They are being forced to say that these schools have really taught children to how to dismantle firearms, etc., in video. No? So right now we are seeing more black propaganda videos in the internet with the faces of these children, that saying that these schools are really teaching students to rebel. So right now, I can't say how worse it is, but all I can say is that it's relentless, and even with this pandemic, the militaries haven't really slowed down in their attacks.
Thank you. The next question is for Casey, and it comes from Julia. The question is, how have the provinces affected by the Taal eruption been handling post-eruption alongside with the COVID-19 crisis?
Oh,
Hi, we hear you.
okay, so right now, these provinces, there are still about thousands of families left in evacuation centers and are more exposed and vulnerable in the coronavirus, because these families live in the 12-kilometer radius of the Taal volcano island, who cannot go back yet to the island, because as of today, FIVOX have recorded about 39 volcanic eruptions,
about 4.5 to 4.6 magnitude of volcanic eruptions, and still observing the changes in the volcanic activities. But these communities are also being assisted by the local government units and other relief organizations. But before the enhanced community quarantine, the Tulungan sa Taal network was able to bring uh, goods to other evacuation centers. But we are more worried for those who for the babies, the children who are living in the evacuation centers through makeshift tents and the other dividers placed in the evacuation centers. For the local government units, um, they have established the Taal Commission on where they are planning to centralize all the donations. So aside from the local, aside from the non-government organization, this Taal Commission will um, will supervise all the donations for the communities. But right now, we're really having hard time in monitoring these communities, at the same time visiting them, most especially under the total And of course, these evacuation centers are also being prepared to be quarantine facilities. So the local government units has to prepare another spaces or shelters or temporary shelters for these communities. And aside from that, they have devised a program for the settlements, resettlement program for the Taal evacuees or the Taal victims that will utilize mortgage for this community. So these families will have to look for lands um, that they could use to build houses and communities that will be funded by the government through mortgage program.
Thank you, Casey. The next question is actually for me, so I'll just go say it and then answer it myself. The question is, do you think Filipino American youths are affected by climate justice, whether it's indirectly or directly? And are there ways that you envision in terms of possibilities fellow Filipino American youths and students can get involved in climate justice? So to answer the first part of the question first, yes, I do think that Filipino American youths are affected by climate justice, both directly and indirectly. I think that kind of everyone is affected by climate change to some extent. And I think in terms of the direct effects, it's hugely based on where you live. That's why, for example, if you live in California, you have experiences with drought, for example, or if you live in the Midwest as well, I know that drought often affects the agricultural industry, and there can often be food shortages because of weather patterns that often will affect food industries in the Midwest. If you live, let's say, by the coast, your community faces a risk of perhaps rising sea levels. Living near the coast in New Jersey, there are lots of homes that have actually been forced to move further into the land because the oceans are rising. And Miami, for example, a very coastal city, they've been seeing the firsthand effects of climate change right in front of their eyes as rising sea levels affect them, and the hurricanes often flood the area. So wherever you are in the US, there are different impacts of climate change depending on your existing climate. Pretty much what climate change does is it intensifies current weather patterns where you live. And so it varies per region, but you will see the effects, and that can ultimately affect food security, water supply, overall infrastructure. Things might have to be relocated. Those are the most direct effects on climate change. And indirectly too, folks in the Philippines or who have family or connections in the Philippines. I think the Philippines, especially indigenous communities and communities very close to the coast, are hugely impacted right in front of their eyes with climate change. And so indirectly too, it'll be people who you know, it'll be your home country that is also hugely impacted by the effects of climate change. And there will be a lot more, I guess, insecurity with water, food. There could be potential wars arising and more conflicts due to water conflicts and food conflicts due to climate change. In terms of, are there ways that you envision possibilities for Filipino American youths to get involved in climate justice? There are definitely a lot of ways, and it kind of depends on how folks want to, where they want to focus their attention. If someone's interested in specifically advocacy for Filipino environmental issues, then working with Filipino NGOs, especially Kabataan Alliance, they have lots of connections with environmental nonprofits in the Philippines, and advocating for issues that the Philippines are struggling with due to climate change on a national level and spreading awareness in the US about these issues. That's a way you can definitely get involved. If you were interested more in climate justice in general, there are a lot of youth organizations that focus on holding their officials accountable for environmentally friendly legislation. There are lots of opportunities to strike. For example, Fridays for Future. Anyone can strike with their local Fridays for Future chapter every Friday. If you're not as interested in the political side of climate justice, but rather scientific side like innovations or in the business industry and advocating for more sustainable business practices, there are lots of organizations that kind of tailor to your own specific interests within climate justice. And I think that everyone should get involved in climate justice, and there are various different organizations, as well as just in terms of an individual level, being more sustainable, reducing your carbon footprint, and consuming more responsibly and more consciously, because I think as important as it is to strive to change the structures that kind of perpetuate a society that fosters climate injustice, it's also important to focus on yourself and changing your own lifestyle habits. I think both kind of play hand in hand and are equally as important. If anyone is interested in learning more about specific youth organizations, I am connected with a lot of environmental organizations in the country. I'd love to connect you with a youth environmental organization if you're interested. So feel free to reach out to me after this panel if you want to learn more. So yeah, that's my question. We have two more questions here. This next question is for Rios and Beverly from Emilio, and the question is, how can we build solidarity between Philams, indigenous people in the Philippines, other indigenous peoples of the Pacific, such as from Guam, Hawaii, Marshall Islands, etc.?
Ikaw na, Bev.
Okay, sige. We actually, the organization that I coordinate, the International Indigenous Peoples Movement for Self-Determination and Liberation, has some work and connections with indigenous peoples in the Pacific. Specifically, we have members and partners in Fiji, Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, and Kanaki. Of course, of special interest that we have is the issue of West Papua. So much of the solidarity work we are trying to do within the framework of this global Indigenous Peoples Alliance. We've also done a lot through our experience with international engagement with the UN and in other international human rights mechanism, wherein we have met a lot of indigenous peoples in these mechanisms and platforms. So we're trying to do that. We have been successful in doing coordinative and bilateral actions between these organizations. And hopefully we would like to develop this and strengthen these relations. But if Kabataan Alliance has some connections, because in Guam, in the Marshall Islands, and Hawaii, relatively, that's also, these are countries wherein you have a relatively significant number of Filipinos, Filipino migrants or Filipino Americans. So, but maybe that's something also that we can work with Kabataan Alliance to build the link between indigenous peoples in these different countries. As far as solidarity with the Filipino Americans, probably not much of solidarity, because I think as Filipinos, or whether we're Filipino American or purely Filipino, um, once you get to build your connection with your home country, it would now not be a question of solidarity, but probably more as a how do you say it? Uh, uh, Part of your expression of patriotism and nationalism. At the moment, maybe we can build strengthen the relations that we've started with Kabataan Alliance and probably other organizations. But in terms of building, being able to respond to issues in the Philippines, we have the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, and we have chapters of this organization in the U.S. No, so I believe that you also have that in your part of the U.S. in the same way that they have it also in, like, in New York, or probably also in Canada. That's what for the meantime I think that can do.
Hi. So we have one more question, and this is for pretty much everyone who spoke on the panel today. The question comes from Isabella. If I am interested to talk more to the speakers, is there a way to contact them? So everyone can answer this question one by one. I could start and then we can just go down the line. So yes, you can contact me. I could put my email and my social media in the chat. I'm most responsive to email. I'll put it in the chat, federalin@gw.edu. And also I'm on social media, so Facebook or Instagram. If you just search up my name, you'll be able to find me. I'd love to chat with anyone who wants to talk about climate change, because I'm very passionate about it. Rias, would you like to talk next?
Yes, you may contact me. I'm most available in social media, in Facebook. I seldomly check my emails, but yes, you can also email me. I'll post my email, my social media accounts. Yes, I would be willing to answer more of your questions. Debs na.
Okay. You can contact us through email. So that's at info@ipmsdl.org, or you can check us out in Facebook and Twitter. If you can't reach us out, probably you can reach out to Kabataan Alliance, and Kabataan Alliance will have to find a way to reach out to us.
Yes, and we can get all of, if it's okay for all the speakers, we can get all of your contacts and share it with everyone here.
Yes, yes, yes.
Casey.
Casey?
Casey? Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
The question is it okay for us to share your contact information if people have more questions or to connect with you? Okay, great. And again, us in Kaba will compile all their contacts and share it with everyone here. And Rafi is also okay to do that. So let's give a mute clap for all of our speakers. And Francesca for holding down the Q&A. And before we leave, Matt's gonna close us out with a call to action. Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, Matt. And again, thank you to our amazing speakers. I know a lot of you had to get up early, and also some of you stayed up late at the same time preparing and giving us time for, despite your busy schedules. Thank you for everyone who participated in our webinar today. It was very successful. And again, while this Earth Day, we came together. Let's continue to come together. And as Matt said, strive to have collective action so that we can create a better society, a better world that will change the systems that be to create a world that's more sustainable for future generations. So with that, maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat and have a good night. Thank you all and good night. Bye. Thank you.
Bye, bye. Thank you very much.
Bye,
Bye.
thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Happy Earth
Ingat.
Day.
Bye.
Happy
Happy Earth
Earth
Day. Thank
Day.
you. Bye bye.
Bye.